Thank you for joining us today. I'm Nicola Hutchinson and I head up the partnerships at Scotland's Town Partnership, and I lead on the Scotland Love Local programme. We're delighted to bring to you this webinar from one of our strategic partners, Historic Environment in Scotland, entitled Improving Places Through Heritage. And just as a wee reminder, we're recording this session today. Our historic environment is a national asset. It creates jobs, enriches communities, and helps us tell Scotland's story to the world. At a local level, it creates the unique identity of a place, can support the visitor economy, and contribute to residents' well-being. The team today delivering the presentation are Heather McNaughton, Strategic Partnership Manager, Gilly Burns, National Strategy Manager, Susan O'Connor, Head of Grants. There will be time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. We welcome any questions in the chat box or with raised hands. For now, let's get underway and I'll hand over to Heather.
Yeah, hi, lovely to see everybody today virtually. Really appreciate your time today. We are going to touch on really some new direction for us. So we've got our new sector strategy, our past, our future. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the new resources that we've developed and also highlight some changes to our funding. We're also really keen to hear from you too at the end about whether the opportunities we have to celebrate heritage in your place and what the barriers are to that, and really what you'd like to see from the Scotland's Towns Partnership and Historic Environment Scotland, if there's anything particular that you think we can do to help you. We'll conclude at the end with a panel session. So plenty of opportunities for questions, but please do use the chat as we go if there's things that you want to highlight. So next slide, please. Always useful just to do a quick reminder about what we mean by the historic environment. So for the historic environment is physical evidence of human activity that connects people with place, linked with the associations we can see, feel and understand. I've put a few slides, a few images on the screen really just to highlight that. So it might be things that we more traditionally associate with heritage, this wonderful castle at Calaverock in Dumfries and Galloway. It could be conservation areas within Campbelltown, or it could be intangible cultural heritage, such as celebrating your past through the Upheliar Festival in Shetland. Next slide, please. We have a vision at Historic Environment Scotland, and that's to make sure that we're internationally recognised for our heritage and culture, and that the historic environment is cherished, understood, shared and enjoyed with pride by everybody. And that's why conversations with organisations working in Scotland's towns are so important, because we can't do this alone, and the historic environment is protected and cherished and enjoyed by everybody right across Scotland, and lots of people have a hand in making that happen. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of who Historic Environment is. We are the lead public body for the historic environment in Scotland, and we're a charity. We aim to protect and understand and share Scotland's historic environment for today and for the future. We've over 1,750 employees and staff and volunteers who work across Scotland in our visitor attractions. They look after our collections. They make decisions which affect how the historic environment is recognised. They look after and develop and sustain traditional skills and carry out research. We're funded by the Scottish Government in part through a grant, and we also generate income ourselves, predominantly through the sites in our care, but also through membership and other commercial income streams gained through the collections that we manage. In terms of our visitor numbers, pre-pandemic, we had around 5 million visitors to our sites across Scotland. We have over 300 sites of national importance. Mostly those numbers have recovered, and you'll experience this in your own places. Some places recovered more quickly than others. And that's a similar story with our membership too. We're sitting at around 184,000 members across Scotland. We are a grant funder in our own right, and Susan will talk about that a little later. So I think many of you will have interacted with HES in a number of ways. You may have a property and care in your community, which provides visitor footfall, or perhaps through the planning and consent process as an applicant, or you might be from a local authority who have a specific role in heritage or planning, or you may have drawn on some of our resources to help tell the story of your place through effective interpretation of your heritage. Perhaps you or one of the organisations in your area have expressed and been awarded a grant from us. So firstly, though, in 2023, a new strategy was developed for Scotland's historic and environment, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Gilly Burns, to talk about that.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Gilly. Could I ask for the next slide, please? So as Heather said, I am the National Strategy Programme Manager for our, as someone has mentioned in the chat, beautifully titled Our Past, Our Future, the National Strategy for Scotland's Historic Environment. This strategy is mission orientated. Its mission is to sustain and enhance the benefits of Scotland's historic environment for people and communities now and into the future. It's a 5-year strategy. And it's important to say that it's a strategy which focuses on national challenges for everyone. So it deliberately selects its priorities and outcomes, and then it's about how the historic environment can contribute to those national challenges and what it does. So we want to really work with everyone, and that's why we're here today, because we want to work with you to ensure the historic environment can contribute to achieving these priorities and outcomes. So I'm going to go on to tell you a little bit, just quickly, about what those are. Could I have the next slide, please? So our first priority is delivering the transition to net zero. And in this area, we need to focus together on reducing emissions and working in ways that build climate resilience. A lot of the historic environment involvement in that is about working in new ways with communities, making sure there is access to new and emerging advice and guidance and investment opportunities around things like retrofit, adaptation and mitigation interests, as well as pushing the need for better access to traditional skills, support for skills businesses that market at local level. We think this is a shared interest for all of us, and that's why we hope we can work with organisations and individuals like you to advance these outcomes. Next slide, please. The second priority sits around communities and places and how the historic environment can work in tandem to encourage resilience and inclusivity. So we recognise that those operating or dealing with buildings or areas with a historic environment interest need to have the confidence and the skills to run those tourism, commercial businesses, or to operate and manage buildings and projects related to the historic environment and its care and conservation. So we need to work together to ensure the historic environment skills work is seamless and it can be there to benefit people in terms of what they need at that time in terms of their work in the historic environment. And we also need to work to make sure that everyone can get involved in the historic environment, and that's around influencing decisions and changes in the historic environment as much as is about communicating the fantastic things that are happening in communities and places that relate to local historic environment interests. That's where partnerships with an organisation like Scotland's Towns Partnership is just a really great way to do that, because we need to work with our partners to push for greater inclusion across the board and to try and influence those direct and diverse interests that the historic environment has a relationship to. But we have to do that with communities and places. So we need to work in a way that you're telling us what you need and what you want and how we're going to get that together so we can collaborate. And So we really think that together, working with partners like you guys, we can achieve this. Next slide, please. Our third priority sits around building a wellbeing economy. And we know that the historic environment plays an important role in our national economy and in local economies. So, and even this month, we have released data around the impact of the historic environment sector. So I'm just going to share a little bit of that information with you, because I think it underscores the critical role that heritage plays in the daily lives of Scots. The historic environment generates £6 billion a year for Scotland's economy, and 2.1 billion of that is attributable to heritage tourism. It also supports 81,000 jobs. And additionally, 86% of Scots believe it's really important to protect our heritage. And that is us seeing the importance the historic environment plays in that partnership with the historic environment, the added value that can come. So we need to keep working in partnership to channel that impact and broaden it by working in partnership with places and organisations involved in developing Scotland's towns and places, so that we can develop those interests around local wealth building, societal and economic change, and enhanced well-being. So we hope events like this are ways to push us forward. Can I have my final slide, please? So my colleague's going to move on today to talk to you, particularly Susan, about the resources that might be available to support you and your interests, but also in how you might want to deliver a number of the things that we've talked about and those outcomes for our past, our future. Heather is also going to tell you a little bit more about wider support that's out there and things that are already underway that you might be able to get involved in. So I encourage you to get involved, seek out the resources shared, talk to us, talk to STP about what you need, so that we can be pushing forward the right projects, guidance and support to share and take on these national challenges together. Please feel free to contact me at any time. We will be sharing contacts after today. We've also just updated our website with a lot more information about the strategy, about our plans, about case studies and resources, about a lot of that data that I've mentioned as well. So this is the website information if you'd like to go to that. And that's it for me. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Heather McNaughton. And I think she'll need her next slide as well.
Hi, yeah, so thanks very much for that, Gilly. Yes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the resources which might be helpful for you. Just to highlight, our slides will be available after the session, and many of the slides have got the links that you need into the key resources that we're talking about. So yeah, so the first one, I'm going to talk to you about a number of things, talking about our heritage, which is a guide to help inform conversations. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Historic Place Lens pilot, which sits on top of the Place Standard tool for Scotland. Some information about how you may access advice about looking after your traditional historic buildings through our Engine Shed resource. A little bit about volunteering as we support the Make Your Mark campaign, and then finally Susan will do some pieces around funding. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the first piece I'll talk about, the Talk About Heritage Guide. This was developed back in 2021, I think, and it was really to help communities and places to think about their heritage and to start conversations about heritage. Particularly, heritage is around people's stories. It's around history, but it's lots of people's stories, and you need to be able to feel comfortable to have conversations in its widest sense. So this toolkit was really developed to help you think about that. How do you start those conversations? Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry, go back one. My apologies. Yeah, so the guide comes in 4 parts. So part 1 is around investigating the heritage, and that's around what do you actually understand about what's there? Have you done a sort of deep dive into your areas? Who are you listening to about that? Have you engaged with sort of heritage groups, historical societies? There'll be different stories, languages and traditions that matter to your place. We have access to resources like CanMore, which is the national record for the historic environment, and SCRAN, which has images of material culture and human history. And all of those can act as tools to help inform conversations. So I would encourage you to make use of those sorts of resources. And the guide talks you through how you would use those. Part 2 is about understanding what's special about your heritage. There's a word we use in heritage all the time, which is significance. So what is the significance of the place, the object, the building, or the tradition that you're looking at? And you can begin to think about the particular values that people place on that. It's a great resource, for example, for building heritage trails and talks, exploring how you might actually build and develop the story of your place through interpretation. And that leads us on to celebrate. So you need to sort of share the knowledge that adds to everyone's understanding of a past. You may have a big visitor economy in your place. It may be important for children and young people or new people moving into your community to understand the heritage of your place and to celebrate that. An example of how people celebrate heritage is through the Doors Open Day programme, which operates across Scotland. And that's running at the moment over the next couple of weekends through September, right across Scotland. And it's a fantastic opportunity to celebrate places that people maybe don't normally go into, and really just opens up heritage to a huge diverse range of people. And finally, part 4 is about the care. If you've got a traditional building, or you've got some heritage you're looking after, or some collections, it's really important about how you manage those assets, and look after them and generate income from them, and ensure that your organisation has resilience around those things. It may be that you have new assets in your community that you want to think about designating or recording, and thinking about how you engage with the planning system. So there's a whole section too in the guide around care, and I would really recommend, it's a very easy read, and I would recommend this guide to anybody as you're developing perhaps local place plans in your community, or you're informing how you think about heritage and your approach to maybe some development of new services or groups or events that you have in your towns. Next slide, please. So with local place planning coming in many places across Scotland, and people are at different stages of development of that, people have been encouraged to use the Place Standard tool. And we have developed a historic place lens that uses the same segments of the Place Standard tool, but also asks questions that inform heritage. So we'd encourage you, as part of your journey around local place planning, to think about testing the historic place lens alongside that. It's in its pilot phase just now. I don't know if anyone's used it already. If you have, please put it in the chat, because we'd love to know about it. And Ginny Sharp, who is leading on this piece of work at Historic Environment Scotland, would be really keen to get any feedback, either from people who have used it or people who are thinking about using it and might need a little bit of guidance. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on our resources in relation to conservation and care of buildings. We developed a few years back now the ENSHED, which is Scotland's conservation centre in Stirling. It's full of people with expertise in how to look after and develop skills in the conservation of our historic buildings. With many communities taking over the management and ownership of traditional buildings, this resource is needed more than ever, because that ownership has sort of cascaded out to a much wider group of people. And we produce guides to help understand and look after buildings which may have some unique features which are managed in a particular way, for example, ironwork or glass or stonework, or you may just be looking for energy efficiency advice for your buildings going forward. We also run events to help people build their knowledge and understanding, and our teams can be contacted through the email shown on the screen. And we'd always advise that you use a conservation accredited architect if you're looking after a historic building and need to develop a management plan to do that. That's a very whistle-stop tour of the resources that we have there. All our publications are on our website. We have things that are called informed guides or guides to specific thematic areas. Next slide, please. A little bit around the support for volunteering. Volunteers are a crucial part of helping to care and celebrate for Scotland's places and stories. We look at this in two ways. We look at how do we provide support for volunteers through the Make Your Mark campaign, and that can be people searching for volunteering opportunities. So that gives a portal to enable people to post up their volunteering opportunities in Heritage and for people to find those opportunities. But we also bring together through a partnership approach other organisations to help them support their volunteering capacity and capability and develop best practice guides and have events as well to support people, to support volunteers within their organisations. And that's open to everyone working with Heritage across Scotland and reliant on volunteers. Next slide, please. I'm just going to finish with a little reminder of it's sometimes quite difficult to find what you're looking for through our website. We're an enormous organisation with lots of different streams. So specifically developed for communities, we have a space within our website called for communities to find the information that's probably most relevant for them. So if you're working with a community or advising a community and you want to direct them to us, by all means send them in through this portal, and we have a dedicated email address to pick up any inquiries there. So just really a shout out for that one. I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Susan O'Connor, who's Head of Grants, who will now talk about our funding programmes. Next slide.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, I'm Susan O'Connor. I'm Head of Grants here at Historic Environment Scotland. Quite often when I'm talking, people have lots of queries and questions. So if they occur to you while I'm speaking, just pop them in the chat and we will deal with them at the end. There's usually lots of really interesting stuff there. So our first slide here is just some of the information we pulled this year when we completed our first baseline grants funding report, looking at how we funded, where we funded and what we funded over the past 10 years in a lot of cases. So here are some of the headline figures. We spent 13.76 million, but actually we were asked for 23.74 million. And that gives you kind of a sense of the extent of the grant funding ask for the historic environment in Scotland at the moment. I'm not saying that all of those applications were entirely suitable for funding, but that was the extent of the ask. So there's quite a lot of interest and vibrancy about the historic environment sector in Scotland, which is really heartening. Every pound of our funding supports another £3.92 of spending in the historic environment, which is really good value for money. And that kind of varies across the piece. So that includes not only our capital projects, but our projects that are more to do with engagement or tangible cultural heritage, which is becoming a bigger and bigger focus for us. If you look at our figures, we spend £2.53 for every person in Scotland on heritage, which is a really nice figure and compares really favourably with similar figures for the rest of the United Kingdom, where it is substantially less. We funded 341 organisations involved in heritage over the past 6 years. And the reason why we refer to the 6 years in our funding report is simply to cover the period of COVID and to make sure that there's smoothing across the piece. And interestingly, at the moment, 74% of our funding goes towards capital and archaeology grant funded projects. However, we're looking at that changing quite significantly over the next few years. Next slide, please. So how can we support towns? Well, our main programme for this is Heritage in Place. And although it says on the slide that it's currently closed for applications, we have actually just reopened for expressions of interest for that with a submission date at the I think it's the 17th of January, but the details of that date are on our website. Heritage in Place is our main programme, place-based programme for towns, where you can apply working in tangent with your local authority for funding to make local towns a better place to be. We tend to run that alongside our friends in the Lottery Fund who have deeper pockets than us, but we tend to co-fund alongside them, and that can fund both development and delivery phases. So if you're interested in that, get in touch, fill in an expression of interest through our website, and we'll give details of that at the end, and we will start to have that conversation with you. Really, we do it up and down Scotland. We're really interested in new suggestions of where to run that programme. So delighted to have that conversation. Next slide, please. So this is an example of where we've run programs at the moment. Heritage in Place, as I said, is our current program, which is like the newest version of our conservation area regeneration schemes. And those are the ones that are in progress at the moment on the right-hand side of your screen. We've run, and on the left-hand side of the screen, we have some examples of our previous conservation area regeneration schemes, which are all across the country, as you can see. We've run over 60 of these projects, so I can't really fit them all on the screen, but that's just to give you an example of the scope and extent of where and how we can fund them. So generally speaking, those projects tend to run over 3 years, or 3 to 5 years, and are focused around various different heritage assets in a place. Next slide, please. So our open funding programme is called the Historic Environment Grant, and that can support a whole range of different types of projects, really anything from a small express grant might be to do with gathering oral histories to do with the historic environment, to large-scale capital projects with a value of up to £500,000 in terms of our grant funding award. There are different deadlines for all of our funding programs, with the exception of express grants, which you can apply to at any stage, and we turn around those within 8 to 10 weeks. Everything else has a deadline that's published on the website. Usually those run every kind of quarter or so, and we try and stick to those deadlines as far as possible. We now allow funding applications to support interim or urgent works. So if you're working on a project where you have a building or a site where it needs urgent works to stabilize it. So for example, if you have a building where there's a hole in the roof and you haven't quite figured out what to do with the rest of the building, you can come to us to say, we need to fix the hole in the roof, but we're going to think about the other stuff longer term as well. And we can give you urgent support to cover out that, just to sort of a stitch in time type works, which is kind of a nice idea. The other idea is interim works as well. Similarly, if there's something that you can do to make a space habitable while you're considering the long-term project, and if you're thinking about meanwhile uses, you can come to us for financial support for that as well. We do this through, the first step for this is our expression of interest process, which is where you just fill in a brief form on the website. It's about 2 pages long, gives us some baseline information on you, and that allows us to not only to assess the bare bones of your project, but it allows us to get you on the books and to include your project details within our overall grant information gathering exercises, which is really useful for us because it gives us a much better sense of how the historic environment in Scotland is working and what the interest is in various themed programs that we have running. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of projects that we have had running at the moment, which are locally based. The one on the left side of your screen is the Murray Fountain in Crieff, which just recently finished, and it was quite a small grant award for us. It was only up to 25k, I think, and it involved just a lot of stone cleaning, some updating of the brasswork, and allowing it to be ready for the final installation of the waterworks to have it running as a fountain again. And that project was really interesting for us because although we didn't give it an enormous grant award, it involved an enormous number of different local groups who all got involved doing different parts of it and really gathered together to become much better and to work more cohesively within the historic environment as kind of like a framework for that engagement. The next slide is relating to Burns Barns, which is small grant which we gave to the Burns Ellis Island Trust, who operate Ellis Island farm site, which and Burns to research the history of the site and to provide new interpretation material. And then on the right hand side of your screen, this is a project to do with a form building in New Haven in Edinburgh. The building was fairly recently taken on by a local group allowed to be retained as a local community centre and funded historic fabric externally, which is remaining group development plans. An example there of our interim grants. Next slide, please. So if you are interested in applying those, as I said, you should apply interest or fill in the expression of interest before submitting a full application. And it is very much a simple list of information that we're looking for as part of that project. We understand that you all have spheres, you might not have understood what the final picture is. It allows us to start considering your project. And more importantly, from your perspective, it allows us to draw in within historic environments. And if we need to, we might be able to assist you in developing your project. You might be able to put you in touch with someone who can help, and allows us also to help you to find other funders who might be able to support your application. They respond to expression of interest within 10 working days of a full submission. For further questions about grants, pop us an email at the bottom of the slide. We always respond to those as quickly as we can. Next slide, please. So, we're not the only funder in town. There's also national lottery grants for heritage as well. They have much deeper pockets than us, and they can grant locally up to 2 million, I think, and go to their centre office in London for decision making. We very often work alongside them in terms of. We're very often part of the same funding package for them. So if you're applying to them, we're available. Oh. Is everybody hearing me okay? I don't know.
Hi, Susan. We're having a little problem with your sound. And we thought we would just go with it, and hopefully it would correct itself, but it's still a little bit crackly. No.
I don't know what I can do about that.
That sounds a bit better.
Does it sound better?
Yes.
I'll keep off the headphones for now. Maybe it's the headphones then. Yes. Sorry, all. Yeah, that's maybe it's a problem with my headphones then. So national lottery grants are also really good bedfellows for us in terms of match funding. They have slightly different funding criteria, but we work very well alongside. And the big difference between us and them is they can fund internal works, and we can't really fund internal works. So we tend to be focused more on the external envelope of a building. And they can also fund new build, which we don't really do. So next slide, please. So this is my final slide, and also to talk to you about the Architectural Heritage Fund, who we provide core funding for in Scotland. You'll see in the picture there's got Gordon and Joe, who are the local reps for the Architectural Heritage Fund. We provide funding through them for development grants. So if you're thinking about early stage funding for your projects of up to about £20,000, they're the right people to talk to. They're both extremely experienced and will point you in the right direction if you're at that early stage as well. And if you're not quite ready to have that bigger conversation with us as well, they can help you untangle it if you're new to it. They do lots of different things. They can provide development grants, as I said. They can also provide loans for works to get underway. They can provide a cash flow support as well. And they're very good for people who aren't that familiar with the sector. I think that's about it from me. Just hand back over to Heather.
Yeah, next slide, please. Can you turn that off? Yeah, sorry, Susan and I are sat next to each other, so we're going to end up with an echo if she doesn't resolve that one, so apologies for that. Yeah, so just finally, we're really interested to hear from you. we're really interested to hear about things happening at a local level, and I've put in the chat, you know, if there are specific questions about sort of local issues or things that you're trying to develop, do please contact us at developmentandcommunity@hes.scot, and we'll try and work through with you directly to point you in the right direction or to help you directly. So, but generally today, what we're really interested in are about where people see the opportunities in their area to use heritage to improve your place. What challenges are you facing? And really, as a partnership, how can we help through our relationship with Development Trust, with the Scotland's Towns Partnership, my apologies, and HES. We're really trying to share sort of case studies, to talk about things that are working well, and to try and find solutions to challenges. So I thought I'd also just take this final opportunity to highlight that whenever we're trying to reach out to people to get feedback, we work through a consultation portal. I've popped that on the bottom of the screen. We currently have consultations out around our managing change guidance, and quite soon we'll have consultation out around our corporate plan, and anything that we're looking to designate as well, we put onto that consultation portal. But enough of the slides just now. I think we'll go back to sort of questions and answers, and I'll hand you back to Nicola.
Thank you, Heather, and Gilly and Susan. There's one question in the chat box from Florence Boyle, which the question is, how does small community capitalise on heritage assets, and what can they do to raise the profile and access to funding?
There's probably that question's probably in two parts. So I think in terms of raising the profile, it's about developing your sort of approach as a community about what it is that you want to get out there, and then working with, you may have an improvement, you might be an improvement district, and you can look at marketing what you've got through that route. You could talk to your local authority about how they reach out and publicise what's in their community, and social channels are fantastic to link onto. And if you've got something great to share, intermediary organisations like the Scotland's Towns Partnership can give you real profile through a case study of something that you might want to share and to celebrate as well. So there's a few ways there, and happy to take a conversation offline about that one. Susan, do you want to talk about funding?
Just assuming you can hear me now. Can you hear me? Good stuff. Florence, I'm just going to pick up on another question that I see you've asked in the chat about the volume of paperwork for a modest amount of funding and a large amount of funding. Yes, we are aware of that, and we're actually looking at the moment at simplifying our process for grants under 100k for exactly that reason. We can't simplify it that much for the reason that it's public funding, and so we have to have a really good audit trail for it, but we are absolutely looking at trying to make it simpler. Hooray, you may say, Florence, I'm saying that too.
Okay, I think the other questions in the chat box have pretty much been answered with, oh, we've another one in here. I think Murray's put a few messages in there, so we can pick up on those separately within the chat box. So we're keen to hear any more questions that anybody may have.
Yes. My name's Ed Archer. I'm the chairman of the Archaeological Society here in Lanark, and I'm also the chairman of the Lanarkshire Heritage Forum. So effectively, I wear two hats. For the forum as a whole, we're quite keen to be involved in all, and working with HES and so on, where we can in Lanarkshire. At a local level, here in Lanark, the Archaeological Society runs a site on Facebook called Clydesdale's Heritage. Very successful. We get thousands of hits, loads of interest, and it seems to be the way forward for getting the message across heritage to a wider audience than is normally possible. But to sustain this, we need money, basically, and we need to maintain our presence in our office and support. That's one aspect. The other aspect of our work, which is developing fast, is doing things with children. We do presentations with our colleagues in the Lanark Museum to children and to anybody else who's interested. Also do interviews as well with people. And finally, we are keen on getting hold of volunteers, but we need to help the volunteers. We've got a number of new people who are very good into art, into photography, into LiDAR, and all this sort of thing. So, yes, we're making big steps forward, but the advice I'm seeking from you guys is, what type of grant should we go for? I can't hear you.
Oh, you're on mute, Susan.
First to do it. If you apply through our Historic Environment Grant Programme, Ed, through the expression of interest form, and tell us what you'd like to do, we can take it from there.
Thank you very much. That is most useful. Thank you. So now,
can I just, if you do that, can I just jump in? Sonia, I think, had asked a question about changing from funding support from capital grants, which, as I said, at the moment are around 74% of our grant aid. We're only just starting to look at that, and we don't know quite exactly what that's going to look like yet, Sonia. But we'll be coming out in the next 6 months or so with some more ideas on that. So I would say watch this space.
Thank you.
I understand Florence Boyle would like to ask a question about volunteer capacity.
It's can you hear me first of all? Yes. It's a bit of a follow-on about the paperwork criticism. If you're in a small community, there really is only a limited pool of volunteers, and they tend to be the people that volunteer for everything. And you're working off a kitchen table. You don't have banks of accountants, lawyers, whatever else is. So it is about the complexity. I suppose it's a criticism of the complexity, and I get about it being public money, but there's also got to be an element of trust about where the source of the application is coming from. I mean, a community council, whatever, anyway. But also, the quality of your application, the way you frame what you're doing, it's an important part of the success of it. So what about some workshops about what's a good way to frame an application? What's a good way to crystallize an idea? Because I know there's lots of good ideas, but you need guidance about how to encapsulate it, how to frame it. So that would be my ask.
That's probably a really good idea, and we can speak to, I'm looking at Heather and her team about how we might develop that. We do open information sessions specifically about applying to the HEG programme, and our next one I think is running in October, so you could attend that. Or just, but we can look to do a separate one potentially on how to fill out the grant paperwork as well. We'll look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I could come in there too, I'm not sure where you are, Florence, but a lot of the third sector interfaces in the local authority area, they'll come under lots and lots of different names, but essentially they are there to support community organisations, and quite often they're running fundraising type sessions and have someone to help support funding applications. It is quite variable, and I think what we can do, picking up on from this call particularly, and in addition to looking at can we run something directly around heritage, is making sure that things are available more through locally through the third sector interfaces, who I know face their own challenges across Scotland, but it's a strengthened partnership we should have.
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes dangerous to overstate how much local authority support you get. I don't mean help, I just mean support, encouragement. Our local authority is invisible in in the heritage space, so unless it's Dumbarton Castle, but hey ho.
Can I just pick up on a question that Anne Foy has put in the chat there? And thank you for bringing this up. That's something I should have mentioned myself. We love a phased project. Anne has said, is it useful to phase projects into manageable sections for funding? Can we apply for something that is a part of a wider project? Yes, please. Yes, very much so. The reason we like phased projects so much is because it allows a smaller group to take on potentially quite a big project and grow as they develop, rather than doing it all in a winner, which becomes a really big funded project with loads and loads of consultants involved, rather than local people actually deciding what happens in the project on the basis of their own lived experience, which we're much keener on. So please come to us with phased projects, so long as we can get a real sense of what your narrative is for progression. That'll make sense to us. If you come to us and say, we know what our phase 1 is, but we don't have a clue what's going in phase 2, 3, or 4, then we can't really fund it, because potentially after phase 1, nothing happens. But if we can read that trajectory through to completion, and that can be over 20 years, happy, delighted to have that conversation.
You'll see in the chat bar there's a question from Scotland's Churches Trust, which I'll probably leave one of you guys to follow up separately. But does anybody else have any separate questions? Any further questions from today's session? No? Okay, well, in that case, it looks like we've got 10 minutes back for lunchtime, which is really quite nice. I'll finish up by saying thank you all very much for attending, and thank you to the team from Historic Environment Scotland for today's session. It was very useful, and thank you very much, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.